And I'm told that they had dance parties in this same building where floors below were torture chambers and people were dealt with so brutally, I don't even want to describe them to you. I can't tell you how darkly poetic it is that both totalitarian regimes used the same building. Ezra Levant in Budapest, Hungary for Rebel News. If I told you that I went to a house of horrors, you would think I went to some amusement, maybe a haunted house or something Halloween themed, but I tell you, I've just emerged from something truly terrifying that is weighing so heavily on me, and I think it will disturb me for some time. I am standing outside a building in Budapest called the House of Terror. And that building was used first by the Hungarian Nazi Party and then by the communist secret police as their terror headquarters, including torture chambers that I just finished touring. This building is now turned into a museum called the House of Terror, and incredibly it shows the same tactics and tools and propaganda and cruelty used first by Hitler's Nazis and then by Stalin's communists. The building on the outside looks really no different than any other building in the neighborhood, a very popular street with restaurants and bars and hotels. This was where the terror agents worked. You can see they added something for the museum. Do you see it says terror and then the arrow cross, which was the symbol of the Hungarian Nazi Party, and the star, the symbol of the Communist Party. This is a unique museum in that it shows how both totalitarian regimes tortured Hungary and indeed sent hundreds of thousands of Hungarians to Siberia, killed countless thousands, and this building itself has actual torture chambers that we just came from that I don't think I would even attempt to describe to you because I think I would get sick repeating what I had just seen. That said, I do not want you in any way to be dissuaded from coming here yourself. In fact, I'll say this. We've been in Budapest for a couple of days and it's a gorgeous city. It truly is a beautiful city with palaces and castles and broad streets and happy people. But this memorial museum is so powerful. I'm a Jew. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Israel called Yad Vashem, and obviously that's very powerful for Jewish people or others who think about the Holocaust and were affected by it. This museum behind me, the House of Terror, is just as morally moving, and it should be of great interest to anyone who survived the Nazi regime and Soviet communism. It doesn't deal, of course, with Chinese communism or communism in other parts of the world. It's a memorial to what was done throughout Hungary and in that basement. Our guide said something very powerful to us. He said, we believe that international socialism and national socialism were equally cruel and both need to be remembered. And think about that. The word Nazi is actually an abbreviation, National Socialist. And International Socialist is, of course, the slogan of communists. And this museum, and the very fact that it was the same building, the same office first used by the Nazis, then used by the Stalinist rulers of Hungary, just absolutely shocking. But throughout it, and there was a focus on the perpetrators of the horrors. There was a focus on the victims of the horrors, but there was also a focus on those who did fight back, who fought back against the Nazis, and who so bravely in 1956 fought in the revolt against the Soviets and actually won, and actually drove the communists out of Hungary, at least for a few weeks, and bravely tried to stop the Red Army before it came back with a vengeance. Some of the things that were done in this building were kept secret. In fact, the basement level was cemented in to hide the torture chambers, to hide from the revelations that came afterwards of what was done here. The communist youth had in this very building one of their clubs, we were told. Just like the Hitler Youth was sort of a social club and a political club for young Nazis, there was a communist version of that, and I'm told that they had dance parties in this same building where floors below were torture chambers and people were dealt with so brutally, I don't even want to describe them to you. This museum was built, and there was some opposition to it, incredibly, because there are still active communists in political parties in Hungary, and indeed around the world. There are very few actual Nazis left in the world because they've been so discredited, and rightfully so. And their crimes against humanity have been hung around their neck. And for anyone to identify as a Nazi is to immediately rule themselves out of acceptable political discourse, or let alone elected office. But incredibly, there are communists to this day who run in political parties, including in Hungary. And of course, communists fill other institutions, including academia. I recall when I was in high school, my English teacher, Al McRae, wore a belt buckle with a hammer and sickle on it. And there was a kid in our class who had escaped the communism in Cambodia. Imagine that. Imagine if that same professor had a swastika on his belt buckle. And really, what's the difference? The Stalinist communists used the torture and used the constant surveillance and propaganda and snitch culture and fear and indeed terror in the exact same ways that the Nazis did. I can't tell you how darkly poetic it is that both totalitarian regimes used the same building. The dark and satanic spirits. I started off by talking about what we call terror in the West. We haven't lived through terror in North America. There has never been a terror, thank God, in that continent as there has been here. And so we have to terrify ourselves for entertainment. We go see horror movies, but we know the whole time that it's just a movie, and then we'll walk out of it in 2 hours and have a chuckle once the lights are up. This was no movie. When I heard House of Terror, I didn't understand it. I thought perhaps it was like an escape room or an experience. No, it is to memorialize the experience. Incredibly, the socialists in Hungary, briefly, the cabinet, we were told, wanted to shut this museum down, again, because they didn't want communism to be denormalized. Luckily, the prime minister knew that that would be a terrible thing to do, and this museum maintains. One thing I was very pleased about was how many young people were touring the museum. Now, some of them were tourists, naturally, and I think that is very good. Let the world know what happened here. But there were also lots of young Hungarians, and that's so incredibly important. And just like, as I mentioned before, many Jews around the world go to Israel and visit Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, I believe that, frankly, people around the world, not just Hungarians, and not just people who lived under former Soviet domination or Chinese domination, I actually will go so far as to say every freedom-loving person in the world who is able should make a sort of sober pilgrimage to the House of Terror here. It's a fantastically well put together museum and memorial, absolute state-of-the-art, beautiful, even though it's showing horrifically ugly things. You'll learn so much that was not taught in our universities. You'll experience, you'll read what it was like. In fact, there's an incredible exhibit where you have two sides of the same cabinet showing the Nazi occupation and the communist occupation, really two sides of the same coin. It's a little bit hard to get to Budapest. We flew from Toronto to Vienna, and then we took a train, and it's quite a journey. It's not easy to get out here. But I think that this is one of the most important cultural institutions in the West. And thousands of people passed through here. It seemed packed when we were in there, and I was so grateful for that. This is a warning to the West, and it's a remembrance, a living remembrance of what happened to Hungary and indeed Czechoslovakia, the rest of the Warsaw Pact countries, and of course to Russia itself. And I think the very fact that Hungary memorializes what happened here is another reason why the globalist left hates this country and the freedom spirit that now animates it. We need a museum of the terror of communism and Nazism in every capital of Europe, and we need to study it in North America too. I'm going to be thinking about my visit here for quite a long time. In fact, I'll probably do more videos about it. I literally just walked out of there and I'm in a bit of a daze. Not quite like I've left a funeral, but like I have been moved and disturbed in a way I certainly did not expect. It's called the House of Terror, and it's in a fashionable cafe district in Budapest. And driving by it, if you didn't look up and see what it meant, you would have no idea what you just passed by. Is from when the Nazis took over here in the mid-40s until the Soviets finally left in 1989. It was simply part of the city. For more stories from our trip to Hungary, go to thetruthabouthungary.com. And if you find this citizen journalism useful, please consider chipping in to help us with our visit here. And frankly, if you are able to muster the resources to come to Budapest yourself, to go to the House of Terror Museum is worth a trip on its own. I'm in Hungary all week doing citizen journalism, trying to find out the truth about Hungary. If you support this journalism or want to see all of my work on the subject, go to thetruthabouthungary.com.